Ed, fantastic to be talking with you today. Would you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Sure. My name is Ed Kless, and I am with Threshold, which is an organization that Ron Baker and I have started just recently that really hopes to bring the professions as well as even other businesses into what we call the transformation economy, or actually what Joe Pine, who is the author of the experience economy and soon to be the transformation economy. And this is it's really a change, not only the business model, but really in the economic system. So it's a lot of exciting times for all of us in the professions, and it's the confluence of all things, AI, a lot of things coming together that are going to allow us to make this leap.
So many things happening, so many opportunities for accounting firms. And one of the things that we both have a shared passion in, and you've already mentioned there, Ron, who I've been spending a good bit of time talking about pricing. Really fascinating topic. Given all of the opportunities that are out there, I personally believe pricing is a huge area that firms should be focusing on. But one of the things that Ron really teed up an area of your expertise is around project management and how these things that are happening are going to change the way that we're monitoring and tracking the performance of work. So let's kick off the conversation with, what do you feel are some of the problems with the ways that accounting firms have traditionally and are currently tracking the performance of their client engagements?
Well, the short answer is they're not using project management techniques. Right? They're using time management techniques. They're trying to say that the effort is what's important. But one of the key distinctions that project management makes is to bifurcate the concept of time into effort, and which is something that we need an estimate of how long it's going to take for us to do planning. But also the more important concept in project management is duration, which is the window of time in which the thing, whatever the task needs to happen. So let me give you an example. You might have something on an audit or whatever engagement you're working on that has a window of time of 1 day, meaning it must happen within this 8-hour day. It must happen before Thursday at 5 o'clock or whatever that window is. That's the duration. The duration is 8 hours. It's always 8 hours. Doesn't change. The effort, however, can be anything from 15 minutes, one person spending 15 minutes on it during that 8-hour period, as long as it's done in that 8-hour period, to 24 hours of effort, where we can have 3 people working on that same thing and all in that 1 day. And then there's 24 hours of effort, but it's still an 8-hour duration. And I think the mistake that oftentimes accountants and other professionals who haven't really studied the discipline of project management make is in focusing almost wholly on effort rather than this notion of duration. In project management, the notion of duration is far more important. We want to know when something is going to be complete, not how long is it going to take us, to a much greater degree. So that's really, I think, the core focus or the mismatch between the way most professional organizations, including accountants, don't do proper project management because of that heavy focus on effort versus duration. Because of that, let's call them tasks, for lack of a better word, and there's lots of words you can use for it, but let's say that a task might also have certain dependencies, right? Dependencies, whether we have to finish this task before we can begin this. Some tasks might have to end simultaneously. They both have to end at the same time. So there's different ways that tasks connect with one another. But the most important thing is that they connect to each other via duration, not via effort. And when you're trying to do planning, if you're trying to do planning via effort, it just won't work. So what this ultimately means is that what we would love to see organizations do is get away from even time tracking at all. And I'll explain how you can do that. First of all, I have no problem with when a task is assigned to someone that you give them an effort estimate. Like, I think this should take you 4 hours. I have no problem with that. That is, Ron and I like to call that doing your timesheets in advance. Right. And I think that that's perfectly acceptable. It's really the retrospective timesheet that's the problem, because it really doesn't we don't learn anything from it except via exception. And that's what I'll talk a little bit about. So I might give you an effort estimate, but I'm also going to tell you, hey, you need to get this done by Thursday at 5 o'clock. All right. What we're really going to begin tracking both at the engagement level. Let's just take an example where we have an engagement that is made up of 100 tasks, just to make the math easy. Right. What I want to do is I want to say, okay, what percentage of those tasks did we complete on or before the original estimate? And let me back up just a quick second and say, first, we can certainly check how many of them are complete. So let's say 90 out of 100 are complete. We can say, all right, we're, quote, 90% done, I guess. So because we've completed 90 out of 100 of them, fantastic. But an even more important question is, of the 90 that you've completed, what percentage of them were completed on or before the original estimated completion date? And let's say that only 45 of the 90 were completed on or before the original estimated completion date. Well, then I can look at this and say, well, this engagement has only a 50% chance of being successful, meaning completed on time and on budget, because we're not, while we got 90% of it done, only half of them were done on or before what we originally estimated as the completion date. So whereas, and what's really neat about this is, let me take the reverse scenario where only 10 out of 100 were complete. Right? This is very early on in engagement. We're only 10% done. Well, if 9 out of 10 of them were on or before the original estimated completion date, I can say, oh, we're 90% tracking toward getting this done in a proper time. But what if only one of them was completed on or before the original estimated completion date? Now I'm saying, oh, we only have a 10% chance that we're going to be. And when do I learn that? Much earlier on in the process. Right. The problem with time tracking as in terms of effort estimate, and I'm sure Ron used this phrase because I think it's originally his, is using time tracking, using timesheets to track the doneness of your project is like using a smoke detector to measure the doneness of your cookies. Right. It's only after the alarm goes off that we do anything. And that's not helpful. That's not helpful for anybody. It's not helpful for the professional, certainly not helpful for the customer. And this is where it ties back into this notion of the transformation economy. The biggest sin in the transformation economy is wasting your customer's time. Because if you really think about it, what most professional organizations do is they save the customer time. So it is about time, just not yours. It's actually about the customer's time, because if we waste the customer's time, that's a grave sin, right? We're actually wasting their time, and that's exactly the opposite of what we're trying to do. But if we save them time, that's great. And then this is where the magic starts to kick in of this transformation economy. If they want to actively spend time with us because they get value from it, not our work time, but them spending time with us, then that's the next level. And of course, the highest level where a real transformation occurs is when they decide that they are not only going to spend time with us, but invest time in us, where they're investing this time with us because they think they're going to get a larger payback on the other side. And that's the magic and the flipping of this whole notion of where time is important. It's not your time. The customer does not care about your time, just like the customer does not care about your costs. None of us ever walk into a store, right? If you and say, I hope they have their costs figured correctly. Right? We don't care. Right? What we do care about is the price, no doubt. But we're making a value decision against that, where we're saying, oh, we want the cup of coffee more than we want our 5 pounds or whatever it is, right? That's the thing that's the decision that we're making. But we want it more because they are, quote, in the end, really saving us time. Yes, I could make coffee at home, but I don't have the time to, or I prefer the coffee that is made at Pret a Manger because it's better than the coffee I could make at home in a shorter period of time. Right. So what's so curious about this is it is about time. It's just the complete opposite of what accountants and other professional organizations have believed for decades.
If we then just unpack that a little bit around what you've discussed as true project management rather than, and I'll admit in my professional career, I was never taught any project management skills whatsoever. It was just assumed.
You were told the timesheet was project management. It's even more bizarre.
Exactly. I worked for a big four firm, and it doesn't get any more sophisticated there than it does in the general world. I can tell you that for now. The spreadsheets were still there to run the timesheets to be able to do everything. And so I'm trying to then unpack that and go, okay, so how would I approach an audit differently if I was thinking about project management? I think based on what you've shared there, what I'd be doing is I'd be trying to break the audit down into a smaller as smaller sized tasks as I possibly could. I would therefore get to a very long list of tasks that would be needing to be done in a complex compliance service like audit, potentially a lot smaller if we're doing, monthly CAS or something like that. But focusing on audit, I would get to a very long list of all of the tasks that need to be done in very bite-sized chunks. And next to each one of those, I would put a due date. Is that the effective terminology? I need to have this done by this date to be able to achieve the overall objective of having this audit opinion signed by this date. So I imagine there's an element of working forwards and there's an element of working backwards in some of those. What things are dependent on what things, and how do I work through that? And then what you're suggesting is you could do the timesheet in advance, Ed, where you could effectively assign next to each of those tasks an approximate number of hours as an estimate of the level of effort.
Mm-hmm.
And that would basically get you, I'm sure most accountants would then be visualizing this spreadsheet in their mind as to how this long list of things have a couple of columns of when does it need to get done by and how much effort is involved in it. Is that the way I should be thinking about project management in the more granular, practical sense?
Yes, that's exactly correct. And then you can look at that then on a couple of different levels. One, as the example I gave earlier, we could say for this particular engagement, what percent of the things were done at all, and then what percent were done on or before the original estimated due date. But I can also then go back and look at it on the individual level. So I can say for Ed, what percentage of the time did Ed complete the stuff that he said he was going to do on or before the original estimated completion date, right? And then that way, because that's now a measure not of your efficiency, but it's a measure of your effectiveness. And this gets to what Ron and I lovingly refer to as the effing debate, EFF. EFF. So efficiency versus effectiveness. And this notion that Peter Drucker said there's nothing so wasteful as doing something efficiently that which should not be done at all, meaning it's ineffective.
Yeah.
And what I think far too many professionals focus on is how can we get more efficient at something? Great. But the question they should ask first is, should we do this at all?
Yeah.
Right? Is this effective, not just for us, but is effective for the customer? There's an interesting, I think it's I'll call it philosophy, but G.K. Chesterton has this thing called Chesterton's fence. Have you ever heard of this thing? All right, so Chesterton's fence is an interesting philosophical argument that says if you buy a piece of property and you're walking through it's a wooded area and you come across a fence in the middle of this wooded area, before you take the fence down, you should figure out why the fence got put up in the first place. And I think what you're describing is perfectly in alignment with this, is that as long as we understand the reason why these things were put in place in the first place, and what we're doing subsequently has now subsumed that reason and rationale because we're doing something else, then we can finally take the fence down. But we shouldn't take the fence down until we understand why the fence was put up. And that's, I think, where a lot of people fall down, because sometimes they get to this like, what's the reason for this fence being put up? And the reason is, I don't know. We've always done it this way. Right. And let's leave the fence there. But you do have to ask the question, why did we put it up? And then once you understand that, then you can properly take it down. And I think that's an important thing. And where I think this fits in, especially with the emergence now of AI, is more and more, and you probably have more insights on this than I do, is we are almost becoming the point where I think accountants, and especially on the audit, will be managers of bots. The bots will be doing the stuff that the traditional auditors have done, the worky part of it. And the auditor then needs to become the manager of the bots.
The question is, well, what are we doing with that? And that harks back to the discussion that we were talking about earlier around how are we really impacting the client? And I think there's so much more to be focused on there. Yes, a lot of the audit process can be automated. and therefore the offering of a compliance service purely is going to change. So the question is, are we just going to offer the same compliance service now for cheaper because we can do it using bots and using automation rather than using humans? Or are we going to use this as an opportunity to redefine what some of these services are and what they represent and how clients buy them? And that's where, to me, a lot of this value pricing, a lot of the more concept around what is the proposition becomes far more important than how do we save a couple more hours on this engagement, because that feels like a race to the bottom. Whereas if we can really position what a CPA firm can do, it's about so much more than doing an audit or a tax return. Yet, are we really showcasing that to clients?
And does the audit really have much value? I mean, there's a guy by the name of Baruch Lev that Ron and I have interviewed on the Soul of Enterprise. I think we've talked to him twice, once for sure. Anyway, his book is called The End of Accounting. And one of the things he talks about is, look, we have the statistics. This is going back now 10 years on how many people actually look at and download any of these reports. And it's like less than 1%. Like,
and all the academic research in that book, which correlates the actual accounting treatment for what people are really valuing in businesses like goodwill and brands and the other intangibles, it's such a real gap between what people care about and what impacts the market capitalization of businesses. And that, to me, fundamentally points the finger at, is what we're doing relevant to the modern world? And if it isn't, then we should be proactively trying to redefine that and reshape that with our clients. It's a really fascinating topic, and I would highly recommend The End of Accounting as a read for people who are interested in this particular area. Let's jump back to the way that we were starting to break down the project, the audit, into the list of tasks, the list of we've got the effort, we've got the due date. Now, I'm thinking, Ed, it's fairly easy for us to try and track the due date that we expected at the start of the project. We may have a separate column for where we're revising the due date. So
correct.
Keep track of what the original one was versus what a new one is as we're project managing the engagement. And we can record when it is actually done, and that will give us all of the reporting that we need. Was it done when we expected it to be done? What's our percentage completion, etc. If we have in there the effort as well, this particular task is going to take 4 hours. Do you like to see people capturing the actual effort against that particular task? Or is that more just for front-end planning rather than back-end reporting?
And thank you for this question, because it's an important point, and thank you for keeping me back on task with regard to project management. So, but it is an important point. What I like to say is, if it deviates significantly from what was put down as that, here's the expected effort. And when significantly is by choice a subjective word. I'm making it subjective because I want the professional to make a subjective judgment, not a measurement, but a subjective judgment as to whether or not they thought it was significantly more or less time. Now, say it takes double, say it takes 8 hours. Now, the professional might say, well, we encountered a bit of a hiccup on this one. I know what the problem was. Something happened in the back end system. We know it's not going to happen again. So therefore, I don't really need to alert anyone because there was nothing that could be done. Right. So even though it was double, it wasn't significant, or there was a reason. Now, if the professional is unclear, they may go to the person who is leading the engagement and say, hey, listen, this took me 8. Person might say, you know what? My bad. It was 4 because we had put that in for 4. You haven't had that experience. The next time you do it, it's going to take you 6 hours. The next time you do it, it'll take you 4 hours. So fine, no worries about that. Or they might say, you know what, maybe we need to get you some better education around that particular task, so the next time that it can take you significantly less, so that we want to manage that. But, and I think the second case, this is even more important, is that if it takes significantly less time, I want the professional to go to the engagement manager or whoever that person is and say, hey, listen, you told me 4. I did it in an hour. Now, a couple of different possible scenarios in that. One, person might not have or may have misunderstood the assignment and didn't do whatever the task was to the level of quality that is needed for that particular item. So the leader might say, oh, this is great, good start, but you really need to do this as well. And that's probably going to take you another 3 hours. All right, great, fantastic. Or they might say, holy cow, you innovated. Well, how did you well, I used ChatGPT to analyze this spreadsheet, and it came back with the numbers in 12 minutes as opposed to 3 hours. Holy crap, let's teach everybody else in the organization about this, right? So what happens is when we see innovation, now all that happens in a timesheet-based system is, oh, great, it only took me 1 hour. That means I have 3 hours to do something else with somewhere in the future. And if I screw up in the future, I can pad my timesheet for that particular task because I know I have 3 hours to play with, right? And we don't capture the innovation at all, and that gets lost. And so it's terrible. So, but we're managing this stuff by exception now, rather than, and if it's within that not significantly different, you just check it off as done. You just check it off as done. You don't worry about it.
And so is that effectively, does that become the replacement to the timesheet? Because I know this is one of the most sensitive topics in the entire accounting profession is timesheets and the notion that we could maybe get away from them one day. But it sounds like if we're populating our task list with significant variances, I think that makes sense. Who cares if it's half an hour or an hour late, either side of something like this, but a notable thing that we can learn from either way sounds really beneficial. What purpose does a timesheet serve if we're recording our time against these kind of projects in this way, Ed?
It doesn't, and I think it is one of the replacements for the timesheet, but I think it's necessary but not sufficient in terms of the replacement of the timesheet. Here, before I go on to the next topic, which is after action reviews, I'll say this: I have done what I call the nuclear exercise in front of thousands of professionals, and it's a very simple exercise. I just simply say, how many in you here have ever filled out a timesheet? And of course, every hand goes up. Right. And then I say, now, how many of you have ever put down on the timesheet what not actually happened, what did not happen, either too few hours or too many hours? And oftentimes it's fewer, right? Oftentimes you work 8, you only put 4 because if you put 8, your boss is going to think you're an idiot, right? Or the customer's not going to pay for it, or what have you. So you don't put on your timesheet what actually happened. You put on the timesheet what you think should have happened, or what your boss thinks should have happened, or what the customer thinks should have happened. And then we say, oh, well, we need timesheets to measure our actual time. Like, what? I did that about 15 years ago. Some guy raises his hand after I did this exercise, and Mark, hand to God, this is what he said to me. It's okay, Ed, because the lies cancel each other out. One, there's I think a fundamental and fatal flaw with the timesheet around timekeeping in that most people don't necessarily. I mean, I've had people argue with me that they say, "Oh, I've always been exceptionally precise in my timesheet." I'm like, and I'm sure there are high degree of fastidiousness. That's true, but I think in the overwhelming majority of cases, 70, 80, 90%, that is not the case. All right, so this is part, but it's necessary but not sufficient for replacing the timesheet. The second thing that I think is important to replace a timesheet is this thing called an after-action review. And this is where the team gets together and we talk about a couple things. And this is straight out of the playbook of the United States military in response to the debacle that happened in Vietnam and various battles. They instituted this notion of after-action review. Some services call it the debrief. This is now proliferated throughout the entire world. Almost every military uses some form of the after-action review. And it's a very simple conversation where we start out by saying, what were the objectives of what we were trying to get done here? What were the objectives? And then we list them out and we say, okay, now, one of the things I find is oftentimes with professionals, I'll get this response. What were the objectives? Well, we weren't exactly sure. Maybe next time we shouldn't do it that way. Maybe we should, the next time we should have like objectives. Okay, but that's neither here nor there. But then we ask 4 sub-questions that are important. One, what went well? The second, once we list all of the things that went well, why did these things go well, either collectively or individually, and we have a conversation about that. Then we say what could have gone better, and we list them out. And the key here is to get a quick list of all of the things that we think could have gone better. And then afterwards, we come back and we say, okay, why did these things go sideways? And we have a conversation about that. And that's the meat of the after action review, where we talk about those 4 questions. So all of this is always designed to take no more than an hour, even on a fairly large engagement. We want this stuff to be quick. So we want to have that conversation. And then the last thing we talk about is, okay, and Ron and I call this the curly rule. There was a movie City Slickers with Billy Crystal and Jack Palance, right, where he's riding in and Billy Crystal rides the horse next to Jack Palance and says, so, hey, Curly, what's the secret of life? And Jack Palance, with the cigarette hanging out of his mouth, says, one thing. Oh, what's the one thing? That's what you got to figure out, right? So what we want is we want one thing. What is the one thing that we learned from this engagement that we are going to correct from now for time immemorial? And it's going to be a covenant, a compact for us to say this is. So it can't be something huge. It's not like we're going to institute a completely new system. We're going to change our methodology. It's going to be one thing that somehow fixes a problem that we needed to solve, and we're forever going to do it. And what we really have learned is that by patching these holes so that we fix them not only that once, but for time immemorial afterwards, that's where long-term improvement comes. Now, this is a really, and I'm going to pat myself on the back a little for this, but I've been talking about after action reviews for almost 20 years. It's at least 15. And from the very beginning, one of the things that I said we needed to do, or I suggested everybody do, is to record them. Put a recording device in. Even at the time, 15 years ago, your phone could be a recording device. Make a recording of the after action review. Because I said, someday we will be able to transcribe them. Right? And I envisioned a world where we had these transcribed after action reviews and we could text search them. What I didn't envision was having them and then being able to upload all of them up into an AI where you could have a conversation with your after action review database and learn from the previous. So think about if we had all of these after action reviews, dozens, hundreds, thousands of after action reviews that we had been recording for the last 15 years, and could now put them into some kind of a custom AI. What could we do and learn from that? So anyway, the time is now to start. If you did, all right, fine, we didn't do it in the past, but the time is now to start after action reviews, record them, make sure they're transcribed, start building a database, so that people can query your own internal after action review systems. And the phrase in the U.S. Army is, we never build the same bridge twice. So now we have the replacement that is necessary and sufficient to completely replace any timesheets. And it's now more about what are we learning? We have become now what Peter Senge, back in his book, The Fifth Discipline, we have now become what's called the learning organization.
And we're very quickly at the end of an engagement of learning and applying that learning at a far more tactical level than any timesheet would ever give you, because quite candid people have just blocked a bunch of hours, etc. So then I'm thinking about what are the other challenges that I might give you if I'm the leader of a CPA firm. I say, well, this is all well and good, Ed, but I use timesheets to be able to identify areas where the client has dropped the ball, and I can charge them more money for making us spend more time doing the audit process. We might call that overruns, we might call it overages, we might call it scope creep, etc., etc. How do you handle the scenario where your teams, it costs you more money to do the work, not through your team's fault, not through your fault, but through some non-delivery of a client commitment? How does this particular world of project management help us in a similar or a better way than a timesheet would?
So I'm going to give a very consulting response, and the answer is it depends. right? And it depends on a lot of things, because you can have a lot of factors in here. Not the least of which is, does this particular, and I say customer, what does this customer have a history of this? Is this something that is repetitive over and over, or was this just a one-time event? If it's a one-time event, my recommendation is to just don't worry about it. I think one of the biggest, well, one of the big challenges that I think, especially because of the timesheet and the nature of billing by the hour, is to try to look at every single engagement as a discrete unit that we want to say we want to make sure that we're profitable on every single engagement. And I think that's a mistake. I think what we really need to do is look at our customer base as a portfolio, similar to how you would look at your stock portfolio, and you have some high risk, low risk, medium risk, and it's okay to take on customers who are higher risk as long as your entire firm isn't all high risk. Now, actually, I say that you could do that, but you have to price it appropriately. Right. And if we start to think about pricing the way an actuary thinks about pricing insurance, and one of the actuarial axioms is there's no such thing as a bad risk, just a bad premium. I mean, Lloyd's of London insured J-Lo's butt. Where did they where did they come up with these numbers? That's a real thing. That actually happened. They came up with a number for it. So what we have to, if we think of price as and we incorporate into our pricing mechanisms, I'm sure you talked a little bit about this with Ron, that we are pricing this partially actuarially to account for the risk across the portfolio, then we are less worried about individual engagements like that. Now, that having been said, there are certain times when we do uncover potential new work. I'm not, if it's part of the audit, it's part of the audit. And suck it up, right? And yeah, you can have a conversation with the customer after the fact and say, hey, listen, next year, if you guys don't handle this, we're going to have to significantly increase our price. So just to let you know, right? Well, we're covering it this year, but next year, if you guys say that you're taking this stuff on and it's all of a sudden not, now you could always even build that in to the initial engagement that says, hey, listen, we've identified this area as where you and your people are going to be the ones who primarily do this work. If you don't, and if you say you don't have time, here's the additional price that's going to apply in that case. Right? Now, again, I'd rather see you do it on a one-off basis, but I can see where if there's a history of that happening, you may put like something like that in place. Right? But again, when are we going to learn that? If we use the timesheet, we only learn about it after the fact. Whereas if we are looking at it in terms of percentage completion and on-time delivery, well, we're going to probably learn about that a lot earlier. So in the example that I first said, say we got 9 out of 10. I'm sorry, we've completed 9 of the 10 tasks of the 100 tasks, but only one of them was on or before the original estimated completion date. I might say, hey, what's going on here? Right. And we can uncover that earlier than we did in the past and maybe take some kind of action and that's where a change request might come in. And notice I don't use change order. I use change request. And the reason for that is that what I found, and this goes back to my days in IT, change orders were usually retrospectively justified. In other words, after we had done the work, now we need to retrospectively go back and say, oh, we did this for you. Here's more. You have to pay us more. No, what we want is a change request that says, hey, listen, we've identified this as an area that's a concern. If you'd like us to handle it, great. But here's going to be the increase to the price. Or you guys handle it any way you want. Outsource it to somebody else. We don't care, but it's still got to be done, right? So that's really the learning. Can we learn about it ahead of time and then process a proper change request? And if a change request is approved, then it becomes a change order. It's just like a purchase request and a purchase order, right? Anybody can make a request, but there's got to be an approval process for it to become a change order. And I think that's the other side of this.
There are a couple of things I just wanted to loop back to,
sure.
To Ed, as part of our earlier conversation. And this was around, so if we were getting rid of timesheets and we're adopting project management principles complemented by the after action reports, how do we handle a couple of things that are really interesting in this area around what about work that we're doing that is not for a set project, like a formal audit versus, hey, I've got to do this training session, or I've got to go and do this, client meeting for business development, etc. There's that piece. And the other piece that I'm interested in thinking about is how does all of this impact resource management and thinking about staffing your audits? So, I know that the audit needs to be done in this 2-week period. I need 3 people historically to be able to do this. And ultimately, I understand that's probably one of the real drivers around how project management has been done incredibly badly in the past, because you don't staff a project by booking 3 people for a week and then working out what to do with them. You flip it around. So I'm interested in just those 2 areas and just trying to unpack them a little bit as to what the knock-on implications are of these things, or how you would think about them if you were in an accounting firm trying to adopt these principles.
So I make sure I understand the question. So you're asking about the stuff that is not normally included in the audit, that's outside of this?
The first bit is if I'm a staff member,
okay,
I might not be spending 100% of every day of my working life doing audits or doing a project. I might have other things that I need to do. I've got to go and do some interviews of some new joiners that
okay,
are coming up, or things like that. So non-project time, how does that get considered as part of this? And a looser link to resource planning, and how does anticipating and booking people to work on projects work in this particular world?
Yeah, and I've seen it handled a couple different ways. One, if you think about the notion of the issues list or task list, what we were talking about earlier, and we say that we can segment it out by person, right? So I might be a professional, and I now know these are the things that I need to complete over the course of the next 2 weeks. These are the due dates. This is my effort estimate. I can then begin to fill in my schedule based on that, because again, they don't care when it's done as long as it's done by. And then we can also have some that same kind of list for internal stuff, right? Where, okay, well, one of the things that I need to do is I need to conduct an interview for either a new person coming into the firm or whatever, administrative, whatever those things are. We can actually have those as part of the list too, that are assigned to individual people. But I think this is, I think, an important thing too. What professionals almost desire more than anything is autonomy. Right, their ability to do with isn't that funny? Their time what they like. I don't like to be told you need to do this on Thursday at 1:00. I like to be told this needs to be done by Thursday at 5:00. Do it when you think it's best, more appropriate for you. Right, and I think that's really what it's about. Because I mean, this just goes back to a quote by Gary Hamel. I might not get it exactly right, but he says a professional is not just someone who accomplishes a task. Right? That's not what a professional is. A professional is someone who is responsible for the meeting of a result, the accomplishing of a result. And there's a difference between just doing a task and getting a result. And I think that's where this stuff comes in. So we can take all of this external stuff, these other things that happen, and begin to work them into this system. That it's not necessarily just for this audit, but it's for other things as well. Does that make sense? Is that
in essence, to answer my question, is the person who is running the project to interview the new candidates needs to create the task list, and those tasks need to be assigned to people with due dates. And they get then thrown in. And I love the piece around autonomy. I feel that this is a way that would actually give people more responsibility over their workload, over how they spend their time, what areas they're most interested in. I think there's some huge opportunities there that we're almost unpicking as byproducts. This isn't the reason to do it, but it's a really good thing that happens as a result of shifting this. And you turn it from, I used to feel a complete slave to the staff planner when I was a junior auditor, because you would look at it and go, okay, where am I going to be for the next week? Where am I going to be for that week afterwards? Because you were just blocked for, well, this week you're going to do this audit, and then next week you're going to do that audit. Whereas this would give a lot more power to the people for them to actually go, okay, well, I'll work out when I want to do that. I'll work out what hours I want to do that in. I'll work out what location I need to be able to do that particular task. That one there, I need to be with the client. I need to meet with them. I need to talk to them. This one here, I can easily do at home. I can be more flexible. I can remote work. So I think there's some really fascinating things there that start to fall out of this shift, and really gives us. It feels like a much more modern way of engaging with our team members and empowering them.
Yeah, it's actually also built on the philosophy of what's called ROWE, results only work environment, which was by a book from Why Work Sucks and How to Fix It by Callie Rensler and Jody Thompson. We've talked to Jody a number of times on the radio show, The Soul of Enterprise, as well. And she's just fascinating. And she talks about this autonomy as being one of the things that's critically important. It's, I think this is true for you as well. But in the AICPA, the number one concern right now is the lack of people going into the accounting profession. Number one concern. And to me, I'm like, I'm not surprised by this at all, because who in their right mind wants to go do in the States, it's really a 5-year degree when it could be 4. And some of the states are actually already flipping and moving away from this, which I think is great. The requirements are then to, in most firms, you then got to go from completely being autonomous in college, right, to now account for every 6 minutes of your day. And if you really think about it, one of the challenges I laid out is how do these people? They didn't do a timesheet in college. How do they possibly get their degree without doing a timesheet? Because they knew what results needed to be, they knew what they were going to be judged on, and they accomplished the task. So all I'm saying to you is do the same thing that their professors. Give them a clear syllabus of what's happening. Here's what we need to do. Here's how you're going to be judged, and let them accomplish the task. And here's the biggest pushback I get. Ed, that would mean that we actually really need to lead and manage. Yeah.
You get paid the big bucks, right? It's to take on that leadership and that management piece. Ed, that's a really, really lovely way to land our conversation. But I'm going to play back to you one final question for us to close out, and it's going to be applying the after action report real time here. So, in all of your time working in this particular area of project management, what is the one learning that you feel most accounting firms need to correct in this particular area?
I alluded to it earlier. Have written objectives that are mutually signed off by the customer and the person who's going to run the engagement. That's it.
Clarity from the get-go. Ed, I've really enjoyed this conversation. You've got some fantastic content out there that I would recommend people really plug into. Lots to learn. And the Journal of Accountancy article you did on this topic over 15 years ago is still incredibly relevant today. So thank you for making the time here today. And I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation in this really important topic area.
Sounds great, Mark. Thanks. I appreciate you having me.